Okay, good morning folks and happy Monday of March break. I thought today what we would do is just finish module 23, which was the module on classical conditioning, without getting too deep in. And I realize we've already talked about this slide, but I thought it was worthy that we just kind of review some things. Classical conditioning is the type of learning that Ivan Pavlov suggested that we all do. And it involves having an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response typically linked. And so that we start this way. We haven't learned anything, and so that's what the word unconditioned means. We didn't learn it. And so if we present a dog with food, as he did, then and that's the unconditioned stimulus, then the unconditioned response is to salivate. You don't have to teach the dog to salivate. It's something that it naturally does. But if you introduce something new to the scenario, let's say, play a tone to a dog, what we call a neutral stimulus, the dog doesn't do anything except stare at the tuning fork inquisitively, but it's certainly not going to drool. And so the goal is, can the dog learn to drool at the sound of the tone, which seems kind of useless, but if we go further, you'll understand why we would do such a thing. And so what we do is we pair, we link the two things together. And so if we take the neutral stimulus, the tone, and the unconditioned stimulus, the food, the dog's going to salivate. Well, the dog's going to salivate because of the food, not necessarily because of the tone, we would presume. And if we pair the two together and we associate them so that every time the dog is presented with food and drools, it hears the tone, then at some point in time, just hearing the tone alone will cause the dog to drool. And so now, the neutral stimulus is no longer considered a neutral stimulus, it's now a conditioned stimulus. We've taught the dog, and now the dog is salivating at the sound of a tone, so now this is a conditioned response. It's learned to do that. And so that's the basics behind classical conditioning. The time where we pair them together, that is called acquisition, where we're associating the neutral stimulus, the tone, to the dog. And we realize that there's some rules. We want the neutral stimulus to come before the unconditioned stimulus, so that it's not like after we feed the dog, then we ring the tone. That wouldn't be very useful. And we should pair the two together at least within half a second. So once the dog hears the tone, they are presented with the food in at least half a second, so that there's a clear association between the two. And then we talked about this little bit of mess here where we have, let's say, a passionate kiss. The unconditioned stimulus is sexual arousal, and so if the person that you are kissing is someone that you are attracted to, then the unconditioned response is sexual arousal. You don't have to be taught that. But if we pair something, onion breath or the smell of a particular perfume to that unconditioned stimulus, and we associate the two things together, then at some point in time, this poor person, in the presence of onion breath, will become sexually aroused because of the pairing between the neutral, originally the onion, and the unconditioned stimulus. Then eventually that will become taught or learned. And so we know that if we stop pairing the two together, that eventually an extinction occurs. And so if you ring the bell and don't feed the dog, and ring the bell and don't feed the dog, and ring the bell and don't feed the dog, over a period of time the dog will slowly stop salivating to the sound of the tone. Extinction does take place. We also know, however, that there may be a pause, and then when the tone is brought back, that salivating may resume. So there's kind of a latency to it. Even though it may have extinguished at one point, it may spontaneously recover again at a later date. We know that some dogs can generalize stimulus, and so rather than a tone at of a tuning fork, it could be a guitar string or a violin string or something like that. But if we pair it with the tuning fork again, then we tend to see that there's a stronger response. That's generalization. But it can generalize to almost any tone once we've acquired it. And then there can also be discrimination. We can teach the dog to salivate only at a particular frequency, so a C sharp instead of a C flat or whatever, and so we can actually get a tone and discriminate one from the other. In other words, there's no sense salivating for this tone because you're not going to get fed, but this tone means food. And if you think of your dog responding or your cat responding to the opening and closing of a particular cupboard in your kitchen, you'll understand that. Now, Pavlov and Watson basically looked upon the mind as something that was not fit for human study, because really it was all about what a creature did, not about what it was thinking. And in doing so, they kind of missed two things by today's standards. They missed the idea of cognitive processes, what happens when we think about things, and biological constraints, that there are certain things that creatures cannot do. Pigeons are not going to be able to type a novel, and humans are not going to be able to fly. There are biological constraints to what we can learn to do. And when I say fly, I mean fly alone. Cognitive processes, if we look at this whole idea, we discovered that Watson and Pavlov basically said that we were sort of mindless biological mechanisms, and we learn because of our experiences, and that shaped our behaviors completely, and that in fact the idea of thought and presumption and assuming and expecting were not present. We know today that that's not entirely true. We know that today creatures learn an expectancy or an awareness of a stimulus, and that's a cognitive process, an anticipation. And so they also believed that it didn't matter, like I said earlier, that whether you were a pigeon or you were a person, you could learn to do things if the environment shaped you to learn those things. They presented you with the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, and they paired things together. You would learn what to do, regardless of whether you're a man or a pigeon. Well, not entirely true. If we look at some biological predispositions, as not that distant of a study, Garcia showed that the duration between the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus can in fact be in hours, not just seconds, and it can result in conditioning. And so if you take something like a rat and you feed it something that has a particular taste, and then later you irradiate it, and down the road the rat gets sick after consuming the material, of course you would presume it was the material, not the radiation, the rat's not aware of that, then at some point in time just being presented with that taste will cause the rat to become sick, when in fact it was the radiation that did it. And it may be hours later that in fact it is nauseous. And so if we look at human beings, and so let's say that we have someone who's going in for a fairly severe treatment, potentially a chemotherapy type treatment, that drug alone, if we inject or administer the person with the drug, will cause nausea. They don't have to learn to do it, it just naturally does that. And so what occurs is that then people have to go into the waiting room before receiving, let's say, their chemotherapy. And then when they're called, they come in and they get their drug, and then they become nauseous. And so what we see is over a prolonged period, people sitting in the waiting room will often become nauseous without actually having administered the drug to them. And so there's clearly a learning that, wow, this waiting room makes me feel sick. If you've been to the dentist or you've been to those sorts of things, and you are sitting there and you smell that mint, or you smell the whatever it is, that the tooth polish, I guess it is, and you've associated not enjoying being there because maybe you had a filling done and needles or this or that, then at some point in time you may be sitting in that waiting room feeling a little anxious and all of the rest of it, because you have learned that in this room with that smell present, bad things can potentially happen. We now know that we can isolate elementary behaviors from more complex ones. And so that even though we may look at a behavior that is incredibly complicated and very complex, we can actually break it down into its little learned pieces. And throughout the study of behavior, we continuously can go back and look at, if I do this, then this happens, or if I do that, then that happens. Interesting that very complex behaviors can be broken down to very simplistic ones. Applications, if we take someone, let's say, who's addicted to drug, and here they're saying a crack cocaine user, then if they start hanging around with the same people and they're trying to get off the drug, or they're going to the same places, then they're instantly going to get the want, they're instantly going to get the drive. With these people I get high, or in this room this is where I would shoot up, or what have you, and become high. And so when I'm in those rooms, I feel that that's what I must do, or when I'm in the presence of those people. And so we know that they need to break those cues because of classical conditioning. Even though they're not getting high, they're still wanting it, and their chance of relapse is higher. Um, we also know that if we feed, let's say that we have a drug and it has a particular taste, an antibiotic, and we give it to a person, and therefore when they get there, the body has, because they ingested the drug, the antibiotic drug, the body may release more white blood cells to fight the disease, as well as the drug fighting the disease. There is a response that the body does from the taste of the drug. What we discover is, believe it or not, if you actually remove the drug and you just give them the fluid that tastes like the medicine did with the active ingredient in, there will be an immune response from that human being, meaning their own body, from the taste of, let's say, it's sickly cherry taste or something like that, they will actually have an immune response to just the taste. And so they don't actually need the medicine within a period of time. Remember that extinction occurs, and so that over a period of time the immune response will drop just to the taste. And so I don't recommend that you stop taking medicine and start taking something that tastes like the medicine, because the effectiveness does wear down over time. But yeah, if we do take something that has a very pungent taste, something that's recognizable, and we pair it with something that has a response on your system that makes you produce white blood cells to fight disease, then if we take the active ingredient away and we just give you something that tastes like it, you will have an immune response. Lesser than with the real medicine, and of course over time it continues to extinguish, and so it's not to be messed with, particularly if you require that medicine. We talked about this in class. Watson actually wound up leaving psychological studies and wound up going into advertising, and he was hired most notably by Maxwell House, and he created the coffee break. And so that if you're going to take a break at work, a little sit down, he associated coffee with that break. And so when we talk about coffee breaks and going for coffee to have a little break or a little pick-me-up, we can thank or blame Watson. And we were talking a little bit in class about jingles and that sort of thing, and trying to associate good times and good things with breaks or good times or good things with a particular place. So if you think of the franchises or that are available out there for you to go and see, then if you think of the jingles, da 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 da, I'm loving it, or anything along those lines, that's an association. They're trying to get you to associate good times and good food and good this and good that with their jingle and with their restaurants, so that if you drive by and see that symbol, Golden Arches or Timmy's or whatever it might be, that you might drive in and enjoy those good times or that good food or what have you. And so we know that association is very strong. Similarly, someone who might have a hockey star or a movie star endorse their product, something very strong, particularly if they represent strength or ingenuity or intelligence or attractiveness, then that's the person that you want associating with your product, if your product is trying to reflect that stereotype. So again, it's a classical conditioning. It's an association of a neutral stimulus, a pair of sneakers, with great performance and great athletic ability, and so you might take a star out there today and associate those two together and pay him or her to be your spokesperson, so that whatever it is that this person is doing that impresses you also now impresses you about those sneakers, whether in fact there is or is not a link. Okay, that is the end of today. On Wednesday, I hope to put up Module 24, and on Friday, I hope to put up Module 25. And then we come back on Monday, we'll start on Module 26. The test that we talked about, which will be probably the Wednesday of our return, we will cut off at the end of 25. And we'll do a little bit of talking when we get back on Monday about that. Enjoy your break, folks, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.